to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
We're back with episode 65 of the Leo Training Podcast, and this week's guest is Mike Perry. Mike Perry is the owner of Skill of Strength in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, and he's a senior Strong First instructor, as well as an instructor for functional movement systems. In this interview, Mike and I sit down and we discuss some key topics for the strength coach. We go over his intake process at Skill of Strength. We talk about specific programming for mixed martial artists. We also discuss some progressions to think about in regards to the pistol squat, as well as the windmill, and key considerations to take into account for a low back injury rehab client. So without further ado, let's roll to episode 66 with Mike Perry, Skill of Strength. Mike Perry, welcome to the Leo Training Podcast. I'm really excited to have you onto the show. We've had this interview in the works for several months now, and finally had some daylight open up in our schedules. So it's great we were finally able to connect and sit down and chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Figures like the one night that we actually get some time. It's a blizzard here up in New England, and it's a little crazy, but the kiddos are in bed right now, so this works out perfectly.
Yeah, no, it does. Just to keep in mind, try not to adjust the computer too much because the feedback there, it got like kind of garbled. But yeah, I'm pumped. I'm looking forward to having you on the show. We've got some excellent conversations in store for the audience. So before we kick into the topics that we've got planned, because we've got some really good ones, why don't you take a couple moments, let everybody know who you are, where you're located. You're doing some great stuff up in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, and you're a senior SFG with Strong First, as well as an instructor for functional movement systems. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I've been a strength coach for roughly 14 years. I honestly don't remember at this point when I started. After school, I got an internship, and I just started off basically doing whatever they asked of me. I was kind of that young kid that was just like, whatever you need, I'll do it. Really, I was like painting walls and hanging stuff up, and it eventually led to a nice career at my first job. I was there for about 6 years at a place called Train Boston Sports Center in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and that really allowed me to jumpstart my career. I learned a ton. I had some fantastic coworkers, and I had some fantastic mentors that I met along the way, and that was a huge part of what I did. And then from there, I took a job at a strength and conditioning facility in Woburn, Massachusetts, and I was there for a few years. And then finally, I decided, hey, I think it's time to start my own place. And I always sort of had that in the back of my mind that I knew what I wanted to do, but it was one of those things where, when's the right time? And if you ask any business owner, there's never a right time. And there was a scenario where the place I was working, they said, hey, we're no longer really offering any type of sort of independent contractor scenario. So I said, well, I guess that's my cue. So at that point, I'm just trying to think about it. It was so long ago. At that point, I was living in Tingsboro, Massachusetts, and we started training people out of my basement, and it was just a small little space. But one of the beauties of this house was actually it had 10-foot ceilings. So I remember when my wife and I looked at it, we're like, the first thing that we both said was like, we could put a rack in here. We can put a pole. Like one of the big selling points for us. So we started out of the basement, and we did that for a while. We got connected with some local high schools, Chelmsford High, Westford Academy. And at the same time, I was still traveling all over. I had clients in Wellesley, Weston, all over. And I was just 7 days a week, just kind of running around, making ends meet. And then finally, we decided to look at some spaces locally, and there was only 3 spaces that really fit, and 2 of them didn't work out. And it just so happens that the one that worked out is the one that we're currently in. So a little bit over, actually about 5 years ago, we leased our first facility, which was about 3,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in Chelmsford, Massachusetts. That's called Skill of Strength. And from there, we grew very, very quickly, and we took on an additional, I'd have to say it was an additional like 2,500 square feet. So, and right now things are cranking. We've been there, like I said, for 5 years, and we're actually going to be there for another 5 years. We just extended our lease. So it's really going well, and it's absolutely insane. But it's awesome. I wouldn't have it any other way, but it's crazy for sure, but I love it.
That's awesome, man. Congratulations. That's it sounds like it's been a very busy and wild ride, but very rewarding.
Yeah, it's been awesome. You know, we started the gym. We started leasing the space when my wife was pregnant with our first child too. So literally, like, she was driving back and forth. She was in corporate America working for, she was doing marketing for like a computer tech company, and she absolutely hated it, but it was paying the bills, and it was a good job, and it, you know, provided health insurance and stuff like that. So she did that for as long as she could. And, we finally figured, like, we're just going to dive in and make it work. It's one of those things where, well, if you just dive in and you don't have a choice, you'll make it work. So, you know, we were at the point where we could do that, and she could leave her job in corporate America, and we've been running the gym together ever since. And she's my partner in crime, man. I couldn't do it without her, because I'm good at the training stuff. I'm good at the, you know, program design, anything training related I can do. But anything like accounting and all that other stuff, man, if it would be like, you know, that scene in Dumb and Dumber when he's got the napkin with the IOU on it, like that. So, but it works out great. We're very, very different, but it works out very, very well that way. So we're lucky.
Yeah. Very complementary skill sets.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's huge. And I appreciate the tip on the 10-foot ceilings for the house. So got to keep that one in the back of my mind when I'm looking in the future.
Yeah, and it's funny. I still have some of my clients that are like, I remember training with you at your house, and I was like, yep, that was a biggie. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and we're lucky. So,
very cool. Congratulations. Great stuff. So, first topic we got down is kind of one I've never really discussed, and I think this is a great one. Is talking about kind of the intake process with a brand new student or a client into a training facility. So, you know, what are the questions and questions we want to ask, putting them through a functional movement screen, and, you know, really addressing why movement matters.
Yeah. So, you know, for us, we get a lot of different leads, and the majority of our leads these days are web-based, right? So people want to know, the first thing they ask is, you know, can I try a class, and how much are you? That is unfortunately the way it goes. And because of that, we purposely don't put our prices out, you know, on the internet, because if people are just price shopping, then they're really not going to truly understand what we're about. So we don't do that. That's a huge part for us. In some other places, they say put your prices out there. For us, we want people to be invested in our facility, because we're going to really invest in them. So if people are just choosing a gym based on price, honestly, that we're probably not the place for them. So that's sort of a big component. So when someone comes in, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's great. You sort of make it a self-selecting filtration process there, just by kind of the way you're setting up the way the website's set up. So you don't have the prices listed. So that way they either A, have to call on the phone or fill out a web contact form, or, you know, C, stop in person.
Yeah, and we'll absolutely give them a ballpark, but we're not going to go into this sort of big conversation about pricing, et cetera, because they're going to, you know, say, well, hey, you know, the place down the gym is $19.99 a month. What's the difference? And it's just like, I'm just, you know, I've got a target on my wall that says bang head here, and I'm just, gosh, this is nuts. So what we end up doing is we always invite them in for a consultation. One of the reasons why we do that is, one, we want them to see our facility. And, you know, you walk into our facility, we've got a ton of turf, we've got a ton of racks. You know, it's a strength and conditioning facility, and when people walk in, they're not used to that all the time. So we want them to see the facility. We can tour, give them a quick tour, show them what we've got, etc. And we just kind of get them familiar with the layout and what we do and where we do things. And from there, we just sit them down and we kind of walk them through the process of all of the different types of training that we offered.
That's great. That's great. So you want them to get in there, really take a feet on the street approach and get them in there and let them see the facility, kind of let it sell itself, so to speak. And, and if they're interested, they're going to dive head first.
Yeah. I mean, for us, we're really not sort of like, we try to be the exact opposite of like a car salesman. I hate being pushy with the sales process, because what's happened is, I've taken the sales courses, I've taken all of those courses that, teach you how to sell. And, it didn't feel authentic to me, to be honest with you. And I found that when I'm honest with people, and that when I've actually just said, hey, take your time, man, we're here, we'd love to have you, it's actually worked out in our favor. So that's been a huge part of sort of our sales process, if you will. But also, we need to make sure that the gym is a right fit for them, but also that, to be brutally honest, that we're not having someone come in that is a giant pain in the butt, because there has been some times where we sign someone up and, they're knocking on your door every day asking for something else. And they're just one of those people that you're sitting there, you're going, oh my gosh, this person is driving us nuts. And, their name comes up in every staff meeting, and it's just one of those things. It becomes like a cancer. So a lot of the times it's almost like a first date in a way, where it's like it's a feeling out process, and you like decide if you want to hang out with them and they decide if they want to hang out with you, etc. So honestly, it's really getting to know someone. And, I think if you can spend a half hour with someone, in general, using your gut feeling, you have a pretty good idea of kind of how they operate and what they're all about. And for us, that's a huge part of it. And we want people to be comfortable, because, again, say you've never worked out, maybe this is your first time in a gym in your 50s and your 60s, and you walk in and there's louder music, there's turf and sleds and weights everywhere. You're going to be a little bit intimidated. But once we actually talk to people and educate them on what we do and the process involved, people buy in.
That's great. Yeah. And that's really refreshing. I'm curious. So what are some of the kind of the main points that you like to make, a potential new student aware of when they're coming in? Because you're obviously, your facility's structured in a way that it's not like a typical, health fitness gym where there's a set schedule and there's classes. You really want them to make a commitment and buy into your philosophy. And, I'm sure that both of us would agree that's definitely not for everybody out there. Some people like to just be able to show up and hop into a class, and they don't want to follow they don't have a goal in mind. So, what are some of the things that you try to communicate early on so they know that, like, up front, like, hey, this is going to be different?
Well, we ask a lot of questions, and when we ask a lot of questions, it gives them time to kind of sit and really think about what they want. And then once they answer and they start answering more and more questions, they almost decide on their own what they think's the best idea for them. So for our adult population, we have basically two types of training that we offer. We have just private training, one-on-one training, and we have our Move adult group training program. So we basically say to them, like, listen, if you've never been to a gym, you have an injury that you've dealt with in the past, you've always got injured, blah, 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 whatever it is, like, the group's not the best point for you. The best starting place at this point for you is going to be spending some time with a trainer. Now, it doesn't mean you have to spend forever with a trainer. It just means, the first few months is probably the best time to learn new things and make sure that your movement's dialed in, et cetera. So, for us, we really educate them throughout the process and let them decide. We always say, like, you've got kind of two buckets here, right? You've got your personal training bucket, and then you've got your group training bucket. And, based off of their answers, it's usually listed right out. Like, yeah, you know what? I've been to the gym before. I was maybe a collegiate athlete, and, I think I do okay in a group program. So, and it's pretty cool because we oftentimes have people switch back and forth. So some people will do, start off with private training and then move into the adult group training program, or someone will start off in the group training program and then say, hey, you know what? I want to dial some other stuff in, or I want to learn some specific skills, they may actually go and hire a trainer for a little bit of time if they want to learn, something with kettlebells or barbells, et cetera. So people float back and forth.
That's great. That's outstanding. Now, beyond, so going kind of after the upfront, like Q&A, giving them a tour of the facility, moving into the actual like physical evaluation process. So obviously you're, a student proponent of using the functional movement screen. Is there anything else that you use to get a baseline?
So we do the normal stuff. We ask them about sort of aches and pains, injuries, medical history. Really, are they cleared for exercise? Like, is there something that they really shouldn't be doing? And a lot of the time we try to get as much information. And a lot of the times 2 sessions later, they'll remind us, oh yeah, by the way, I forgot to tell you that I got hit by a car. Not like 3 weeks into it, he's like, yeah, my back's been hurting me. I'm like, what's going on with your back? You've never said anything. He's like, oh, about 2 months ago, I got hit by a car. I was like, what? So literally, so it's just fun because people actually forget about those things. But so what we do is we honestly, we ask a ton of questions. We talk about aches and pains, all that basic stuff. What do you do for work, et cetera, because you can get a ton of information about people just by asking them. Like, you'll ask a lot of people that come in, like, what do you do? I'm a tech guy. They'll tell you right away, I sit 50 hours a week, et cetera. So understanding their jobs is very, very important. If you've got someone that's in manual labor, right? And they're just destroying themselves 50, 60 hours a week, bringing them into the gym and destroying them is not probably the best idea, right? Or, for example, I work with a couple accountants right now. It's crazy season for them. Like, they're working 16-hour days. If I know that they're an accountant, I know that this time of year is not the best time of year for them to be crushing their workouts. It's sort of maintenance period, and it's just keeping them healthy and trying not to, let their work kind of destroy them for this whatever, period of time that it is. So, we try to get as much information as we can. Obviously, we run the FMS with everybody. And depending on the person, I'll dig a little bit deeper. If I get referrals from, physical therapists, chiros, physicians, et cetera, I'll dig a little bit deeper just because I can. Honestly, I kind of have the time to do that. So, and I'll do some ankle clearing stuff. I'll do a little bit more in-depth stuff with the hips, thoracic spine, some basic cervical screens, nothing super fancy, but it just allows me to just get more information.
Excellent. That's great. And I love the point you made about kind of identifying what their profession is, because that's going to tell you a lot about kind of, what posture that person's living in throughout the day and throughout the week.
Yeah. I mean, someone has like a high stress job, right? They might be that person that's going to have to spend a little bit more time on breathing. And, I love the breathing stuff. I love it, but I think people overuse it and waste time. But there are some people that are super high strung that educating them early on about proper diaphragmatic breathing and just saying, hey, listen, when you wake up, hit this for a few minutes. Before you go to bed, hit this for a few minutes. Before you train, hit this for a couple minutes. Because those are the people that are probably going to just get the biggest bang for their buck, just because they're always in such a sort of sympathetic state that maybe breathing is that one thing that'll kind of bring them down a little bit and really make a difference on their overall quality of life. Great point.
Is there anything else that you want to touch on regarding the intake process before we jump to the next topic?
It's just different for our group training program than it is for personal training. Like with personal training, I mean, you're seeing that person all the time. So I would say the eval process continues. It's not just, you don't just screen someone and, move on, right? Like, you're going to take their information, and their movement prep and their exercises are going to change over time, depending on their goals, what's going on in their life, their extracurricular activities, et cetera. So all of those things are going to constantly be changing. And that's why with our personal training clients, we always try to rescreen, or at least hit their sort of their weak links within the screen to make sure that we're not missing everything. For our group training program, we use the screen as more of a filter. If you listen to any of Gray Cook stuff, he's, the first thing he talks about is, protect before you correct. And, again, what we're going to try to do with that screen is we're going to take off the table exercises that may potentially put someone in a scenario that they should be in. For example, if someone's got, really, really poor shoulder mobility, we're not going overhead with them right now. It's just not a good idea. So again, the FMS is fantastic for the group training environment for that reason. And we're in the process of actually putting together a video library for our adult group training program. So if they've got some stuff going on and they need to refer to the video library, we have that for them. So that's sort of the next thing that we're working on.
Nice. Yeah. Getting the content out there. Awesome.
Yeah. It's part of it. It's a value add thing. Once it's done, it's, you can save it, upload it on Vimeo or YouTube, and they always have more information. So
for sure. Yeah. That's great. Okay. So next topic we got down: correct versus corrective exercise.
Yeah. The funny thing is for some reason the FMS has sort of gotten a bad rep over the years, and I'm not really sure why, but as being someone that's in it all the time, I can assure you it's one of those things that it's really common sense stuff, right? Like if you're going to bring someone into an exercise program, we just want to see where they're at. We just want to see how they move in an unloaded fashion. That's simply it. We want to see if they can show us the minimums, competency of movement, and that's it. So the big thing that I always hear about is, correct exercise is corrective. And in a way, I believe,
thank you.
But, here's a perfect example. Say someone has a left ankle that's totally locked up and it's restricted and they want to squat. Well, you can regress their squat as much as you want, right? You can do a TRX squat. You can do whatever you want. But unless you clean up that ankle, they're never going to be able to progress, right? So they could have a perfect TRX deloaded squat, right? But if you want to take them further and you want to maybe move them onto a goblet and then to a double kettlebell front squat, why wouldn't you just clean that ankle up if you can, or refer out if need be, and then just move on? So it's one of those things. I think correct exercise is awesome, but only if you've taken those glaring asymmetries off the table.
Right.
And there are times where just overall quality movement is going to improve things. Absolutely. But again, when we run the screen, we're looking for the biggies, right? We're looking for those, those red lights, those, hey, don't go there right now. It doesn't mean you can't go there down the road, but right now is just not a good idea. And that's why we do it. Obviously we've got the different screens within the FMS, but we've got some other clearing exams like the, extension screen, spinal extension, and spinal flexion. Listen, if someone comes in and they don't tolerate extension very well, we need to see what's going on. And it takes 15 minutes to do this, right? So it's just one of those things where if you can correct those big things and then teach them correct exercise, then why wouldn't you do it in that order?
Yeah, totally. And it is, I'm not quite sure as well why corrective exercise, that phrase has gotten kind of a bad rap, because, at the end of the day, if you're improving somebody's movement quality and that translates to better function and them owning the lifts or the skills that they're working on, that's all, money in the bank.
100%. And I think for the longest time when, everything was functional training and corrective exercise started getting popular, I think people were going about talking about dysfunctional movements and correctives in a very negative way, and almost like a fear-mongering way, where it's like, if you don't clean this up, this is going to happen. And it's like, that's the worst thing you can do with a client, right? Is tell them that they're jacked up or screwed up, right? If someone's really jazzed up and they're walking around like the Tin Man, they know. Like, I think if you were to screen someone and just ask, have 10 people squat and just have people say, does that look good or does that look bad? Most people know what a good movement pattern and a bad movement pattern looks like, right?
Yep.
So, I think just screening people, doing the basics, correcting those sort of glaring asymmetries, and finding some sort of balance, and then just moving on. I think that's the way to go. And obviously, you have to know how to coach. And that's the biggest thing we see is, the FMS, you can't just screen someone and be like, here's your score. Good. You're all twos, you're symmetrical twos. Things are going to go great. That doesn't mean anything. You still have to not be a knucklehead and, still do things correctly and still, coach the student appropriately, right? I mean, that's a big part of it. You can have the best screen in the world, but if you're doing things poorly, it doesn't make a difference. So I think once you can screen someone and evaluate someone, then it comes down to coaching and teaching them how to, squat, lunge, deadlift, press, pull, in an appropriate fashion for them, because everyone's going to be different, because I'm not going to do a pull-up like you, and so on and so forth. We're not going to all squat the same. We're not going to deadlift the same. So I think just educating people on that process is a really, really important thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Education is the name of the game. So out of curiosity, when you're working with your adult movement class, and then I also know you guys do some group classes with high school students, when you put those two different populations through the FMS, do you see, generally speaking, like any trends in the FMS, like things that say an older population may need to work on, or is it kind of all over the board?
So it just depends. It's all over the board. It just depends. So for example, I would say adult, it's mobility work. The biggies we see tend to be like an active straight leg raise and a shoulder mobility. Those are the biggie. And it's just because, a lot of these people have desk jobs. A lot of these people have spent years building a family, trying to, make a mark in their field, or get to that point where they're making good money, et cetera. And, fitness has been sort of the last thing on the list. And a lot of the times they come in, they're at the point where they're like, hey, listen, I've got a family. I've been busting my butt for 20 years, 25 years. Now I got to take care of myself. I've had that conversation several times. So I would say with adults, it's kind of mobility based. And with kids, man, it's all over the shop. It just depends. It really depends on, the athlete and what's going on with them. But what we try to do with our athletes is we screen them, we give them their sort of correctives, if you will. And then when it comes time to warm up, we'll build a couple of those correctives into the movement prep and then continue on with our movement prep. So for a biggie, like ankle mobility is a huge one, right? We see a lot of issues like raise. We see a lot of issues with like T-spine rotation. So we're going to hit ankle mobility in their prep. We're going to do some straight leg raise corrections. We're going to do some, quadruped T-spine rotations or side lying rib pulls. And then we're going to just do their regular sort of movement prep, like their athletic based stuff, like, skips, shuffles, all that stuff, all those things that are going to, increase core temperature, get them actually warmed up, and then go from there.
Excellent.
We try to get them.
Yeah, no, totally. I was just curious because, it's always interesting to hear, if there's the same specific issues keep coming up in those populations. Mobility tends to definitely be the thing that pops up most for the older population, especially because they've spent so many years consistently just kind of sitting at a desk job. So that it takes a lot of time and a lot of work to kind of start to undo some of that.
Yeah, so actually you'd find this one interesting. So we had a group of 60 rowers that we worked with a couple years ago, and like 85% of them had active straight leg raise and trunk stability issues. Oof. So geared a lot of their movement prep and a lot of their programming around that stuff. And a lot of them came in with like sore low backs and just a lot of nasty stuff. And by the end of the season, almost all of them were hitting PRs, and I don't want to say all of them, but most of them weren't complaining about their low back anymore. And it was cool because what we did with that scenario was we screened everyone, we found the common thread, and we programmed with that in mind. So, did we catch everybody perfectly with 60 kids? No, but we did a really good job at being aware of where they were. And if we didn't run all those kids through a screen, we would have never found that trend. And we potentially may haven't had impacted them the way that we could have. So I think it's important to do that. It's just more information. Yeah,
no, it absolutely is. Yeah. And that's cool. That's really cool. I like that, the little case study you just shared. So very neat. Yeah, I always perk up anytime there's anything rowing related. So very cool. Awesome. Is there anything else that you want to touch on regarding correct versus corrective exercise before we hop to the next topic?
I think the one thing, and I know you've had Brett Jones on this, and Brett's one of my good friends, and we had this discussion about corrective exercise and movement prep are different things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're working on someone's running mechanics, and one of the things that they need to focus on is maybe sprinting or speed, or you're doing tempo runs, but one of their biggest issues, maybe shoulder mobility, right? Well, obviously we know that the upper body plays a large role in running, right? So we want to make sure that we're addressing the corrective exercise, which for them is T-spine rotation, etc. But at the same time, we want to make sure that in their movement prep, so their correctives is their shoulder mobility, right? So that's their corrective. But if someone's going to sprint, you can't just do shoulder mobility prep, right? You have to do everything else that will get them prepared for their activity. So I think when a lot of people talk about just use their correctives as a movement prep, I think you're missing some stuff, right? Because you want to raise core, you want to work on tempo. In that case, like skids, coordination, sort of large, sort of compound movement. So you have to keep that in mind.
That's a great point. So for a runner that you obviously gave an example of the corrective exercise. So would you have them do some specific drills in terms of working on their running mechanics in terms of the quote unquote the movement prep aspect?
Yeah. So what we'll do is exactly. So we'll take them through their correctives, whatever they need. And then as far as what we're doing that day, we'll take them through some basics. We're going to hit the ankles, right? Then we're going to do like our floor-based stuff, which is like our adductor rocks, our hip hydrants, all of that stuff. And then we'll get them up into the larger compound movements, like your, hands to instep with the rib pull, lateral lunge. And then we always finish up with like A skips, B skips, shuffles, stuff like that. So yeah, we're always going to, if we can, make part of our movement prep skill oriented, right? So, especially with our younger athletes where we're trying to focus on running mechanics, man, if we can throw in skip variations, whenever possible, we do that because, two things are going to happen. One, they're going to warm up, but two, we're going to reinforce their running mechanics. So it's kind of a twofer there.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like how you're utilizing the portion of the movement prep to really get back to them focusing on the skill that they're trying to work out at hand for their specific sport.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. Okay, so big one here we have is training clients with injuries, specifically low back rehabilitation.
Yes. Man, I can't tell you how many people come through the doors with low back stuff, right? And sometimes it's diagnosed. Sometimes it's not. It's just one of those things that we get it all the time. And, being sort of a movement guy, and having a back injury, having a few back injuries in the past, I'm definitely sensitive to to people that have that. And it's kind of one of those things where people come in and they're just like, they're literally bummed out. They're like, oh man, my back's jacked up. I've been to a whole bunch of physical therapists. I heard you can help. And I'm like, ugh. I'm like, geez, no pressure, right? So, and I'm like, hey, listen, we can try. We'll do our best. I'll give you everything I got. That's kind of my normal answer because I don't want to be like, yeah, we can help, blah, blah, blah. But, I tell them that if we can change your movement and improve your movement quality, good things will happen. So, a lot of the times, some people come in with a back injury, right? And they come in, they're like, I've done, all this PT. And they've done cortisone, they've done everything, right? But they haven't changed the way that they move. So they go in moving like crap. They go to PT, they do a bunch of bird dogs, they do a bunch of sideline clamps, they do a bunch of those, low level core things. They rest for about a month as well, which is a big part of why they're getting better. Maybe at that point, if they're not doing well, they go get some cortisone shots and then they just dive back into life, but they don't change anything else. And it's this really nasty sort of cycle that happens. And what we try to do is bring people in. And again, we do the same thing. We listen and we try to hopefully educate them on what they need. And then we go from there. So again, we run them through the screen. Now, sometimes I won't even take them through a screen depending on where they're at. And from there, then we just start with the basics. And I always start them on the ground. And, one of the reasons why I do that is honestly, is just kind of to reduce the overall threat response, right? A lot of these people, they're afraid to tie their shoe. They're afraid to, bend over and grab something, right? They're just really nervous about moving because, they've injured their back sneezing, right? I mean, it's just those scenarios. So with all of our low back people, we get them on the ground. We usually start them in the supine position, and we just give them some basic drills from there, whether it's teaching them how to do a pelvic tilt and breathe, whether it's it could be just breathing with breathing with a posterior tilted pelvis and a different ribcage position, stuff like that. So we start them in supine, and then we take them through all of these steps in supine and slowly graduate them up to sort of like the sideline position, where we can work on, plank variations, side plank variations, etc. And then we just move them up into like quadruped. And again, we hammer a whole bunch of stuff from there, and then we go into half kneel and tall kneel. And eventually we stand them up and we start doing some standing based movements. And then we get into the bigger patterns like, hinging, squatting, etc. So it's definitely FMS based as far as, how we approach the correctives. But it's one of those things where everybody's different, but we always start very, very low level. And the cool thing about it is, if they're at a point where they're doing stuff and they're nailing it, cool, we can progress. But again, we don't want to skip steps when it comes to that, people with low backs. It's just, it's a tough one, man. But you want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence, because a lot of times they're coming to you going, hey, listen, I've tried everything and I was hoping you could help me. And again, it's a ton of pressure, but for me, it's almost like a fact finding mission, because if I can positively impact these people, I feel like I'm doing my job. And the beauty of that too is I've got a great relationship with some local clinicians where I can refer out and say, hey, listen, I don't know what's going on. You're in pain. You don't know the source of pain. I'm going to refer you out to one of my PTs. They're going to figure out what's going on. And then you can do PT. And at the same time, you can come train with me and we can work together. And that tends to be a fantastic combination. We've got a few guys that I refer to, and they're awesome. And it's not a blind referral. It's like, hey, I know that these guys are really talented clinicians. They're going to take care of you, and they're going to make sure that when you leave them, you're on the right path. And honestly, that's the best thing you can do with people, because again, it's a scope of practice thing. There's certain times where it's like, hey, if I don't know what's going on, I don't know what the source of pain is, I'm not touching that, man. I refer people out all the time, but they appreciate it, because if I can refer them out with a good clinician, they get, taken care of, and then they come back and they're feeling awesome. And then I can start the training process. It works perfectly. And the people that are patient with that are very excited about the outcome, because they usually end up doing pretty well.
Yeah. And that builds a lot of trust between you and that person.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just really important to really take care of these people with any type of injury, to be honest. I mean, having a solid network is huge. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've done so well with referrals from clinicians locally, because we kind of know our swim lane, and we're not going to do anything that we shouldn't be doing. But it's a lot of fun. And when you can talk to people on the same level, there's a guy that's an SFMA guy locally that we just talk shop all the time. We kind of nerd out and, go out every once in a while and drink beers. Yeah, that's what it's come to at this point, right? But no, honestly, it's just it's a great way to build a network, and honestly, you've got some great friendships out of it as well. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really, that's probably my favorite stuff, man. I've trained a lot of high level athletes, but when you can help people in that scenario, it's a blast.
Yes, it is. It's very rewarding, because those folks usually, they really appreciate it, because they know. They know what it's like to be constrained and not be able to move well, and not have that ability. So then, like, when they get it back, it's like, okay, like, I'm going to make sure I do all the little things to hold on to this and maintain it.
Yeah. If there's one thing that I will say that I've really had some aha moments over the last couple of years, especially with working with FMS so much, is people do a really good job at like the supine drills, the quadruped drills, all the side plank variations and plank variations. But I really think the biggest change is when you can really educate them on the half kneel and the tall kneel position. and really teach them about leveling their pelvis off and staying stacked and et cetera. Because I feel like people go from all of the floor-based exercises, right, all the way to standing, and they skip those transitional postures. So I feel like, oh, it's like cool. When I lay down on my back and I do exercises on my hands and knees, I feel great. I should squat now. And it's like, we probably skip some things. So those transitional postures, specifically like half kneel and half kneel variations, where you could do half kneel chops and lifts, or even half kneel holds, or tall kneel rotations, etc. I felt like those have been a game changer from helping people make the transition from floor-based exercises to the bigger patterns.
Yeah, I totally agree. And even beyond the chops and lifts, I mean, there's a ton of value in doing, half kneeling presses, those types of things, just, forcing yourself to really lock the rib cage down to the pelvis, have that good, control through the torso, really just making sure that you own that movement.
Yeah, those are the biggies. And same thing with quadruped. Even I feel like that's one of those things. What do people do in quadruped? They do bird dogs, and then they send them on the way. But there's so much that can be done in the quadruped position that it's a game changer. I actually spend a lot more time there now than I ever did, just because I really feel like it's that important, and I really feel like it's one of those postures that can be a game changer for people. I actually just wrote an article for FMS that they posted.
I was just going to say, I read that. That was great.
So yeah, and there's a ton in there, and it's one of those things. There's, even as I dig deeper, I find more. So it's kind of fun.
So besides the bird dog, any type of crawling, what are some other exercises you like from the quadruped position specifically?
Well, I mean, obviously, you set them up, you get them in their positioning, right? And the biggest thing that I've really noticed is working on hip stability in the quadruped. So say you're on all fours, right? And your left knee is the down knee, and you extend your right leg back. So it's not a bird dog, but you're working on hip extension on one side. Getting in the right position where you can challenge that down knee to work on hip stability is a fantastic drill, right? And it's one of those things that people actually get in bird dogs, and they'll shift, and you'll actually see a lot of the issues in quadruped from a compensation standpoint that you will in standing. So you'll see like a lateral shift, or you'll see their hip may adduct a little bit or whatever. There's a ton going on there. So I found that if you just set people up right and you put them in a position, you lift one limb, and especially with the lower body, man, you can get a lot of mileage out of that. And you put them there and they're just smoking. And the beauty of it is you can actually, that's how you start to train single leg stance, is in quadruped, because you take the lower limb out of the picture. You're loading the hip, but you take the ankle out of the picture, which is a fantastic way to do it.
Very cool. Very cool. I like that a lot. That's awesome. And that's a little bit of Sherlock Holmes there, because, as you're saying, you're watching them move, you can pick up some of those compensations at a lower level posture.
Yeah. And if there's something that I've really learned kind of through the FMS curriculum, and I actually recently took SFMA as an auditor. I mean, obviously I'm a PT, so there's a lot of medical stuff that I can't do, but I just went because, one, I work for them, and two, I just wanted more information because people ask a ton of questions about SFMA when we teach, and I want to be able to give them the appropriate answer. But one of the things that they always talk about is just remove a part, like take parts out of the picture to see what's going on, and that sort of got my mind thinking. Well, it's like, well, how can we do that with other just movement patterns? How can we take things away to dig a little bit deeper? And that's one of the reasons why I started digging into the quadruped position a lot more.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So we're going to kind of, we got one more topic before we kind of get into some training specific stuff. So progressions and why regressions are doing your work twice.
Yeah. So, I always hear about progressions and regressions, right? And here's the way that I look at it. If you're constantly regressing people, you started off in the wrong position. If you're always having to, do your work twice, that's not good. It's a waste of time. Now, if you start people off you do your evaluation, and you start at a, an appropriate challenging level for that person, then just move slowly. In my opinion, that's the way to do it. I feel like people skip steps a lot, right? And listen, I've done it before, man. I can't tell you how many times I've put someone underneath the barbell early in my career when they had no business putting a bar on their back. And then I had to go backtrack and I'm like, oh, we'll have them do this, and then we'll have them do this. And next thing I know, they're doing a deloaded squat on a doorknob, but I started them with a bar on their back, right? Like if I just started in the appropriate spot, I wouldn't have had to do my work twice. And honestly, they're going to be like, well, why was I having the bar on my back and now I'm doing this thing on the doorknob? And you're sitting there going, because I'm an idiot, because I don't know how to do my job. No, but honestly, that's one of the things that I've really tried to avoid is I've made a ton of mistakes. I mean, nothing earth shattering, right? But I just look at the stuff that I've done as a younger trainer and go, that was just, I didn't know any better, to be honest. But now I look back and I can say, wow, I've definitely come a long way. But for me, I always look at just progressions, like what is sort of the lowest level thing, and then what is my next logical step. And it's not always that black and white. There may be some way I have to get creative with things, but that's okay. But if you figure out the progressions that you like to teach and you're not missing anything, I think that's a fantastic way to work on your training with your clients. Now, for some people with a squat, I would say the toughest squat, if you will, is an overhead squat, right? But a lot of people aren't getting there ever. But if looking at sort of the highest, the squat with the highest degree of technical difficulty, we would say it would be an overhead squat. But I think every coach should just almost look at all the exercises and just okay, here's my sort of like the evolution of man sort of thing, right? Like look at your basic low level exercises and just list them out. And that's been something that I've done, and it's been a game changer for me. It's really, really made a big difference in the way that I train people.
Yeah, and I'm sure, and having it written out, it makes it easy because then it's there, and you can just kind of scan and look over and be like, okay, based on the evaluation, this looks like a really good, appropriate, starting point for that individual.
Yeah, and even if you start them off, let's say, and you're doing a split, started the body weight split squat, and then you found that you know what, we'll have them do an assisted split squat with a cook band or something else. Like no biggie, right? It's a small regression. But if you've loaded them up with a bar on their back with their split squat when they should be doing, a split squat with a TRX or cook band, then all of a sudden there's these big gaps that you missed, right? And that's what I'm trying to avoid with all of my training is yeah, I don't mind regressions. Things are going to happen. There's going to be times where, I have clients, they take a 2-week business trip and they come back and they're just moving like rubbish, right? The first week of them, I'm not diving back into their program. I'm just kind of knocking off the cobwebs and, just getting them back to their normal baseline before we continue on with their progress. So, again, I'm not against regressions. I just think if you find yourself constantly regressing people, you're probably not in the appropriate starting place to begin with.
That's a great point. So take the time, do a thorough evaluation, and make sure you're selecting the appropriate exercise for that person at their current skill level, not where you think they should be.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
That's great.
Yep. That's the biggie.
So we're gonna kind of shift gears a little bit here. We're gonna talk a little bit more about some fun training focused topics. So you work with a ton of mixed martial artists as well. So we're gonna kind of shift the overarching topics into MMA specific. So I guess let's start kind of from the beginning, from the student client side. So is the intake process for that specific population, the MMA population, is that at all different, for them? And if so, what are some of the adjustments that you may be making?
It is different. We have to. There's so many more variables with fighters, right? A lot of these guys will train 2 to 3 times a week. 2 to 3 times a day. I'm sorry. So you have to understand what their weekly schedule and what their weekly volume and workload looks like. They could be doing pad work in the morning, they could be doing strength and conditioning midday and sparring at night. So you have to really look at their total workload and then decide from there what's appropriate for them at that given time. And honestly, a lot of the times what happens with fighters is, hey, Mike, I know you work with fighters. I've got a fight coming up. Can you help? Sure. When are you fighting? 5 weeks. And you're like, oh, like 5 weeks, man. Like that's a toughie, right? So a lot of the times you have to skip some steps, right? Because like a big thing is fatigue, right? So you got to condition the heck out of those guys and do your best to get them ready, right? So fighters are a different breed, and depending on the fighters, they can be very inconsistent. Some guys I've had for a very, very long time, for 4 years. Some other guys, they come and go. So a lot of fun to work with, but but it's just always different scenarios. I mean, there's probably, I would say, only 5 guys that train with me all year round. Like they'll fight, they'll take a week or 2 off, and then they dive back in. Those are the guys that I can really spend a lot more time, doing the things that I want to do with them, kind of, filling gaps and really programming them in a way that's appropriate, not sort of in this, hey, dude, I got to fight in 5 weeks. Can you help scenario? Because there's so many things to think about. They're sparring, they're grappling. Then you got to think about their weight cut, because a lot of the times if they take a short notice fight, they could be cutting 25 pounds, 20 pounds.
Wow.
Take that into account. And honestly, it's a lot to balance, to be honest with you. It's a little crazy, but that's actually one of the reasons why I enjoy working with fighters, is because it's like this constantly evolving puzzle that you'll never really solve, but you have to think of all the variables, right? You have to think of, well, shoot, what do they need? How do they move? What is their primary skill when they're fighting? Are they a striker? Are they a grappler? Are they a wrestler, etc.? Because all of those things make a huge impact on what we're going to do with them. Right, you take someone that's been boxing forever, and their upper body never gets tired. You're not going to have to do, upper body endurance-based work with them, really, because they've done it for so long. They have those adaptations, right? But those may be the guys that you have them, push a sled and their legs are destroyed in 15 seconds, right? So it's like you look at that scenario and go, oh man, is this? What can we do? To make this make the biggest jumps in their performance? And that's the fun part about fighters, is because there's so many times where you think you kind of know what's going on, and then you dig a little bit deeper and you go, wow, that's really what I wasn't expecting. And one of the things I've been really paying attention to lately is just efficiency, and how efficiency can give you a really poor idea of their cardiovascular capacity. So if you're really good at something, you're so efficient, right? You can do it for days. It doesn't mean you're super fit. It just means you're super efficient. And if you get exposed in a scenario where you can no longer be efficient, then you're screwed. And that's something that I found personally too with training jiu-jitsu, is efficiency is a huge part of people's skill set. But just because you're super efficient at something doesn't necessarily mean you have this amazing gas tank or you have this amazing level of strength. It just means you're super efficient at something. So there's so many variables. But you take that super efficient athlete and you give them, a ton of strength, and you work on sort of all their energy systems. Now you're making a monster, right? So I think one of the things people have to be aware of is just efficiency and training effect and all of the variables. Like, I trained at a place called Phoenix BJJ in Lowell, and my coach, Rafael Cornera, he is just a monster. Like, and he can toy with me like I throw around my 5-year-old. Like, it's just right. I'm just like, please don't kill me. But it's one of those things. He never gets tired. He's so efficient. He never gets pushed. And he does. He trains his tail off too. But it's one of those things like, I'm never going to make that guy tired. He's going to need someone with a similar skill set and similar gas tank to really make him work, where, he'll, like, when I'll roll with him, I'll just be like, dude, like, stop. I'm going to die right now. Like, I'm tapping your pressure. Like, it's one of those scenarios. So, conditioning is a weird thing, man. It's, I think oftentimes you have to look at their overall efficiency and then go from there. Because here's a perfect example, right? If someone can run, I don't know, I'll just throw some numbers out there, can run 3 miles in 18 minutes, right? So they run, they can run a good clip and they can deadlift 400. They probably don't have a strength and conditioning issue, right? If they're gassing on the mats, they probably have a technique issue. And that's one of the things that I'm really learning and diving into is looking at all these variables. If you're just killing it in the gym and you're a weight room hero and you can do your sprints like a madman and you're killing it, but the second you get on the mats, you gas out, it's not a strength and conditioning issue. It's probably a technique issue. And that's one of the things that I'm starting to really learn now that I've, dove into BJJ and I'm doing it for myself.
Wow. There's so much there.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. So managing the fatigue, that's probably going to be one of the biggest, things that you're trying to account for, because, these are not your typical, student client coming in through the door. They're a professional athlete. They're training 2 to 3 times a day. So I'm guessing you're going to have to be in, pretty steady communication with their coaches to kind of be aware of their workload on a weekly or monthly basis. And then, if they've got harder sessions coming up to, obviously you don't want to be doing a really hard session after they just did a hard session the day before,
So the majority of the are from Team Sityodtong in Somerville, under crew Mark Delagrade. Those are most of the guys that I work with. So I know their sparring nights. I know their schedules. So when one of those guys comes in for me, it's pretty easy to figure out. Like, I know when they're going to be more tired and we can just plan around it.
Nice. Is there any particular lifts or skills that you think have good transferability or applicability to, MMA overall?
Honestly, I would say that the biggies are pull-ups. Literally, like, if I can and I have the time, I'll try to run all of my guys through the fighter pull-up program, appropriately named. Honestly, it's just a game changer, and strong lats and strong grip are a huge part of mixed martial arts. So, if I can run them through a full cycle of that, I will. A lot of the times it doesn't happen sort of as it was, written, where it was, I believe the original fighter pull-up program was like 5 days on, 2 days off. A lot of the times I'll have them complete the whole pull-up program, but they'll only do it 3 days a week because that's usually when I see them. So, it's not just a 30-day program. It may be drug out to maybe upwards of 2 months, but still, if they just finish up with that, it's a really simple program to do. And then we go from there. So that's a biggie. Deadlift variations. It could be it could be conventional, it could be sumo, it could be trap bar. It doesn't really make a difference, but my biggies for those guys are deadlifts and pull-ups. I feel like are the 2 biggies for fighters. And then a lot of stuff that I do with those guys at the beginning is like, anything with 2 kettlebells in the rack position. So whether we're doing double kettlebell front squats, we're doing double kettlebell rear elevated split squats, double kettlebell reverse lunges, etc. I just feel like anytime we can really focus on a lot of anterior core work at the same time, I feel like that's a fantastic way to train those guys. Now, are there better ways to train like the lower body? Yeah, but I feel like if we're trying to make the biggest impact on their training with a lower body movement, a lot of those exercises in the double kettlebell rack position, game changer.
Very
and
nice.
You put a double, if you do even if you do double kettlebell front squat sets of 10 with like double 28s, it's a smoker, man.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of sucky. So, right?
Yeah.
People don't do that. And if I can get the work out of those guys with double 24s or double 28s and not have to load their spine up, with a back squat, awesome. I'll find out leg strong.
No, that's huge. I love that's one of the reasons I love the rack work with the bells, is because you can do some of those movements just like the points you addressed there. You're really working on the anterior stability, getting really strong. and getting some lower body work in. And that's for all the points you mentioned that transfers directly over into rowing as well.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit into some of the kettlebell specific movements, which is a nice little segue here. You've had some awesome videos that you've put up on Facebook over the last several months, if not the past year. And some of them that come to mind, you did a great, I think it was maybe 10, 12-minute video on the pistol, kind of walking through that one. And one of the biggest takeaways for me with that was, because I could see it, was how important the weight shift is in the pistol.
Yeah. It's a biggie. It's funny because when I started teaching myself how to do a pistol, like I didn't have any practice. I remember getting the Naked Warrior and just reading it and trying it. And at that point, I know I didn't move well. It was me struggling to get through it. But I somehow eventually started doing pistols, and I taught myself, never had a coach, and I just kept on working at it. And then, as I continued to do them and actually, started getting a little bit smarter as a coach, I actually understood the various components that goes into the pistol. And then people started asking me, hey, can you show me how to do that? And I was like, yeah, sure, I can try, because it's not one of those things like that you could just dive into. It's pretty tough to do. There's a lot of mobility requirements, stability requirements, et cetera. So, but one of the things that I've always started messing around, not always started messing around, but I've been messing around with in the last couple of years is just understanding sort of how to utilize a weight shift and a counterbalance to gain access to patterns and to improve movement overall. And, one of the things that comes to mind initially is like the goblet squat, right? So if you're doing a goblet squat and you push the kettlebell away from you, it's a counterbalance, and it's going to allow you to get a little bit deeper. It's going to allow you to stand up a little bit more vertical, right? But that counterbalance is going to help you gain access to the pattern of the squat. But at a certain point, right, we need to bring that load closer to the body. So you've probably done this too. If you all of a sudden bring that kettlebell tighter to your chest, it changes the squat pattern drastically. Mm-hmm. So I took sort of that idea over into the pistol where I said, let's try to play with the weight shift. And it was one of those scenarios where, I was trying to coach people on the biggest mistakes I see in the squat, the pistol squat. Like for example, the biggest thing I see is people doing TRX squats. When you do a TRX single leg squat or pistol squat, all of your weight is backwards. So you've got all of this weight into your heels, right? And you never understand what it's like to center your torso over the middle of that foot. And the TRX squat, while it can challenge you, it can develop, some single leg strength. It's not going to help you with a single leg squat. So, I was like, well, shoot, this is not going to work. It's a good idea in theory, but the weight, if you let go of that TRX, you're falling over. So one of the things that I started doing with the kettlebell was just started utilizing sort of the weight shift. And it was one of those scenarios where, when I coach it, I talk about getting small and kind of pulling the rib cage down and getting tight, kind of almost crunching yourself up into a ball and locking yourself into a little bit of a flex spine position, and then sort of shooting that leg through and using that counterbalance as you shoot the leg through was a huge part of teaching people. And it was one of those things I had never seen anybody teach it that way before. And I put it out there, and then all of a sudden I started getting all of these like messages, and a lot of people shared it saying, hey, that got me my first pistol. So it was really one of those kind of like, cool, like, all right, I think I'm onto something here, right? Just because the way that I've seen the pistol taught was, again, through that sort of TRX progression, which I didn't like, or it was just, tapping to a box and going lower, which, that will work. But, I think for me, it was just messing around with the various components of it, and then, and then going from there.
I played around with it a lot after I saw your video. And then the other thing too that I noticed, and you made this comment during the video, was just kind of shifting into one leg and kind of sitting over there and shifting the weight forward. I could not believe how smoked my anterior tibialis got.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's because that muscle is not used to working that much, or it's from a function of, sitting more, like whatever that is. But it made me realize how important that particular, anterior front of the shin strength is in the pistol, in that movement.
Yeah, well, that's your dorsiflex. That's one of your dorsiflexors, right? So anterior tib is what kind of pulls the ankle upwards. So, but one of the things, again, with a weight shift is if you play with the weight shift in various exercises, it doesn't have to be just a pistol. You can still get a lot of mileage with just weight shifting, right? You don't have to go right into a single leg exercise. You can just teach the body to load one side a little bit more, but still have the opposing limb as sort of training wheels, right? And that's one of the things that I found with a lot of my training is let's play around with the weight shift. Let's find different ways to, load what we're trying to load, but still be safe. Because how many times have people tried to do a pistol, and what's the first thing that they do is they try to just do a pistol and they fall over. Well, they haven't taken those steps. They haven't done the appropriate progression to do something like that. So just getting to the bottom, using the kettlebell, because again, if you're at the bottom, if you're in a deep squat position, and the progression that I used was like prying goblet squats with the elbows inside the knees. And then I started doing goblet squats, like a deep squat with the feet together with the elbows on the outside of the knees, right? And that is going to allow you to use that kettlebell as a counterbalance. As you push the kettlebell out, you weight shift to one side and you extend the leg. So the kettlebell will actually act as a counterbalance, but you can actually get a little bit better weight shift when the elbows are on the outsides of the knees.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great one to play around with. So I'll try. I think I should be able to link to that in the show notes so that people can check out that video.
I actually uploaded it to YouTube as well. I actually found
nice.
I didn't think you could do it, but I found a way to take your Facebook Live videos and you can download them to your computer and re-upload them. I didn't think you could do that, but hey, a little Google action and I figured it out. I thought videos were like repurpose them, but I finally figured a way out. So we're going to try to get all of my Facebook Live videos, at least the ones that came out okay, and upload them to YouTube.
Cool. Well, then I'll track that one down and put that in the show notes. That's great. Let's talk about the press and the windmill, just because I'm training for the level 2, so I got a particular kind of focus on some of the level 2 skills. So what are some of the main sticking points or common mistakes or things you see with those two types of skills?
Well, I mean, are we talking kettlebell press or military barbell press?
Sorry, kettlebell military press.
Okay, so, well, here's the first thing that I see when people are going for their level 2 and they have to get their half body weight press is they don't give themselves enough time. They have no idea what it feels like to get their body weight in one arm, and they just sign up because they're really excited about kettlebells and they just pass the level, right? And honestly, that's what it is. Then they decide to dive in. They're like, cool, I just passed my level 1 and it's August and there's like a level 2 in October. And then they try to cram it all in, right? And it's very, very different because level 1 is, I would say, I don't want to say it is more conditioning based because you got the snatch test. You've just got a lot more volume in general. And I would argue that level 2 is a little bit more strength based and you need a lot more mobility because you are doing things like the bent press and the windmill and jerks and stuff like that. So, but the first thing I would say is give yourself plenty of time, honestly, and get yourself on a quality program. There's a couple different ways you can do that. The way that I got my half body weight press and even heavier was I just did like a easy strength routine, like a 40-day type thing where for 40 training sessions, I pressed. And that was a biggie for me is just, different bells, following the set and rep schemes and going from there. It was, when you're pressing 5 days a week, you accrue volume that way. That's one way to do it. And honestly, the other way I would say is just wavering the load, having a medium, light, and heavy day and just making sure that you're using the appropriate volume.
Nice. Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now is I got a heavy, light, medium day and spreading it out throughout the week. But yeah, giving yourself plenty of time, that's huge. I mean, it's I've had a few other instructors in leadership say, essentially, be patient. That's it. Be patient.
took my level 2, and I forget when it was, maybe 2011, and this was in the RKC days. The testing was very different. So in order to pass your level 2, it was a half body weight press. You'd have to be able to do a pistol, and you had to be able to do a tactical pull-up with your foot through a 24, a dead hang pull-up. That was the testing requirements for level 2. And I can't tell you how many people failed. I bet I think we had like a 60% failure rate that weekend because people couldn't do a pistol. People couldn't hit the press. And it was just one of those things. But those were the requirements back in the day for my level 2.
That's different. Yeah, it's different. That's very different.
And, I luckily prepared for it. But yeah, it's so different now. I mean, with Strong First, I honestly can't tell you what like the RKC crew is doing, but I know with Strong First, it's very, very different.
Cool. Any tips or insight on the windmill?
Honestly, so the big thing that I've really seen with people is when they get into their stance is that everyone's stance is different and you have to play around with it. Mm-hmm. Just like a squat or a deadlift, you have to find your own stance. And it's one of those things where, you start off in a symmetrical stance. The easiest way to kind of with over sort of audio is you get in a symmetrical stance. If you're doing a right-sided windmill, you'll 45 degree to the right with both, and you sit into the back hip. So the majority of the weight goes into the back hip, and the front leg. It takes some of the load, but I would say that the rear leg's probably doing 70 to 80% of the work, whereas the front leg's doing a little bit less. So, but one thing I find is people have a tough time sitting into that hip and then coming out of it. And one of the reasons why they do that is people just fold over and they don't do a posterior weight shift. And a hip hinge, in order to have a good hip hinge, you have to have a posterior weight shift. And it's the same thing with a windmill. So a lot of people fold over. They just kind of fold over and all of their weight goes toward their lead foot and they don't load up the back leg. So that's like a biggie, is learning how to, sit up and actually weight shift back and then bring the hips through. The windmill is a variation of a hip hinge. So that's the biggie. And there's a couple different ways to do that. But and honestly, the biggest thing I see too, and I don't know why it's taught like this, is people go way too low in the windmill. They think like it's a requirement to touch the floor. And it isn't. You go as far as you can while maintaining a neutral spine. There's no need to. Now, from what I've seen in general, I've seen, women in general tend to be a little bit more flexible than men. And from what I've seen, women tend to do a little bit sort of a deeper windmill, which is totally cool. But I know for me, I'm not touching the ground. It's just not going to happen. Something, but I know what I'm capable of. I know how to sit into my hip and go from there. And I would say the last thing with the windmill is make sure that when you're sitting into your hip and you're hinging, it's a true hinge and it's not like a lateral shift. Like, the easiest way to describe like a lateral shift is if you're standing real tall and your feet are together and you just kind of hip shift out to the right, you're kind of just, kind of jamming your hip in the socket. And a lot of the times people do that on their windmill. So they go in and they start to do sort of that hip hinge, but it goes from like a hip hinge into like a lateral shift. And they kind of just jam their hip in the socket, and it's not a really healthy way to move. So and that's where, you start to piss things off. Yeah. Knocking your head of your femur into your pelvis there, probably. Yeah, it doesn't go so well. Ask me how I know I've done that. I tore. I don't even know what I tore, but I pushed it doing a windmill one day because I was trying to hit the floor because that's what I was told. And pop, and I definitely tore muscle. It was bad. It was probably 6 months. It was high hamstring type tendon thing. It was awful, but now I know, right? So yeah, again, I have a lot of experience because I've done a lot of dumb things.
Well, I appreciate that insight. That's good. I'll make sure I don't try to force myself to touch the floor and just maintain the neutral spine.
Yeah.
Any other points or kettlebell technique exercise you want to touch on before we move into rapid fire?
Honestly, I think if there's anything that I could say that people going into the certifications specifically should focus on is on their double kettlebell front squats, man. Keep the elbows to the ribs as best as I see it all the time where people get in the rack position. The second they descend into the squat, elbows fly off of the body and they lose everything. And it becomes this sort of bastardized front squat thing. So that's one of the things that I always look for, and it drives me a little bananas, especially if you want to get into like jerks and push presses. Is you need that good connection. So when you dip and you explode up, you can sort of allow the elbow to blast off of the rib cage and get the kettlebells overhead. So if you're dipping, not dipping, but if you're performing like a double kettlebell front squat, and every single time you do that, your elbows are coming off the ribs, you lose that connectivity, and it really doesn't set the tone for a good push pressure jerk down the road.
That's a great point. I love that. So I'll make sure I video myself or look at myself in the mirror for that one, and keep the ribs glued to the rib cage, or the elbows glued to the rib cage, so to speak.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Rapid fire time.
All right.
Here we go. So Mike, given all your knowledge and expertise at this point in your career, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
Be patient with your skill set. It's not going to happen overnight, and just take your time and learn and understand principles, not just methods.
Love that. That's a good one. If you had to pick one, what's your favorite strength training exercise?
Pull-ups. I'm a pull-up guy.
All right. How has your training changed today compared to 10 years ago?
10 years ago, I was all about lifting heavy and being a knucklehead. Now I'm about, being a good dad and being healthy. Recently had a pretty nasty back injury where I had to, go through some stuff. And at this point, it's all about being healthy. Honestly, it's about doing the things that I know that will keep me healthy.
Awesome. Well, the next question is, what injury have you had and how did that change your training? So I don't know if you want to share more, but you kind of already answered that one as well.
Yeah. I can give you the rundown of all the dumb things I've done. I grew up playing soccer my whole life, and my right-footed guy, and I can't tell you how many times I've struck the soccer ball with my right foot and just absolutely tried to smash it. Right. Over the years, had some wear and tear. Come to find out, a few years back, I had a couple tears in my labrum. I had a small fracture in my acetabulum that I didn't even know about, and my right hip was just smashed up. So that was one of those things I had to work through. And I would say, gosh, over the last 10, 12 years, I've had some disc injuries that just keep on popping up. The first time was about 10, 12 years ago. I had 2 herniations and I was out of work for a week. I didn't have any surgery or anything, but every once in a while, those things pop back up. And actually, I'd say about 2 months ago was the first time ever and as long as I've lived that, I've actually had to have a medical intervention. So I actually went in and I was in rough shape, and they gave me 2 cortisone injections in my low back. And after that, I rested and I completely changed my program. Like, I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. I haven't touched a barbell since, to be honest with you. I'm starting myself off like I would do with one of my clients, which is really hard for me to do because I always want to go back to where I think I was. Like, I remember when you used to be able to do that. But yeah, and honestly, I've done some dumb stuff, man. I've always tried to push it too much and sort of have that meathead mentality. And, I've got the MRIs to prove it. So, at this point, honestly, it's just about, just staying healthy and, trying not to do anything that will, keep me from being a good dad and a good coach, because those are the most important things. Right. So, yeah, I'm starting off, man. I was doing snatches the other day with a 16 kilo. I'm going real light on everything, but this is the best I've felt in years, to be honest, because I just started fresh.
That's fantastic. So that's a great takeaway for everybody out there. Don't be afraid to take a step back and own the movement, go lighter, and do some things, that you haven't touched in a while.
Yeah, I just literally said, what would you say to your clients? And even my wife was saying that. She's like, what would you say to your clients? Like, what would you have them do? And I literally had to force myself to use that approach, because sometimes as strength coaches, we think we're immune to that sort of thing, right? Like, no, I know what I'm doing. I mean, yeah, I should be like taking my time here. So that's been, it's a learning process, It's one of those scenarios where it's easier said than done.
Totally. What's one thing that high school athletes should be doing more of to complement their training and their health?
Honestly, find a good coach and learn to do the basics really well. I can't tell you how many times kids come in and they're like, my coach is making me do this, or don't worry, I lift in the weight room. And honestly, if you can find a good coach and just learn the basics, you're going to be, so much of a better scenario and position than a lot of us were. Because I never had a coach. When I was in high school, there wasn't strength coaches around. There was our, PE teacher telling us to go heavier, right? It was just pretty much what it was. So I would just say, honestly, find a really good coach. And man, I'm surrounded by places that are just coaches everywhere. I mean, within a half hour, there's Boyle, there's Cressy. I mean, the two like biggest places in New England, right? And there's other places like Achieve. They both Achieve, Jeremy Frisch and Jason Lauren. Those guys are like just absolutely fantastic at what they do. So like, go to places like that and learn and get educated on how to do it, not just crushed.
Awesome. I love it. What's your best tip to improve recovery after a training session?
Sleep. I mean, I feel like sleep is the number one recovery tool. Obviously, eating well is a biggie.
Yeah.
But it's funny, since I started jiu-jitsu, and literally it's been the toughest thing I've ever done, and I've been getting my butt kicked, and it was like one of those things. It's like I literally needed sleep. Like I would go home and I'd eat, put the kids to bed, and I'd just be like, good night. It'd be like 7:45. I'd just be like, and honestly, sleep, like if I didn't get that sleep, nothing would have mattered. I could have eaten well, but for me, honestly, it's sleep.
Yeah, I love it, man. It's great. Okay, last three are fun ones. So, what's your favorite meal?
I gotta go with pizza and beer, man.
Nice.
As a strength coach, I should say something healthy, but you know what? I love my pizza, and I'm a little bit of a beer snob, so those are my two.
Love it. What's one book everyone should read? Can be from any genre.
Honestly, so Extreme Ownership is my biggie. That is something that I would highly recommend to everybody. That is just a game changer. That was a recommendation from Brett Jones, and that was one of those things where I'll definitely go again. And I would say, honestly, the other one would be Never Let Go from Dan John.
Nice.
Just like I've had people that aren't even in that strength and conditioning world just read that book and be like, wow, that was fantastic. Those are my two biggies, honestly.
Awesome. I love it. They're being added to my list. Final question. Who have you studied or do you continue to study in your career to improve and get better?
I would have to say, and it's going to sound pretty cliche, but definitely Gray Cook and Pavel. I mean, it's just it's not like when you get into a room with those guys and you start to listen to them, you're just like, I'm dumb. Like one of those things, because like, and they're two of the nicest people, but like there's days where I'm like, yeah, I'm starting to get this. Like I'm pretty good at what I do, right? And then like I talk to Pavel or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, like it's just I don't even feel like I know what I'm doing. So those guys are biggies, man. And one of the guys that I was really impressed with when I saw him speak was Nick Winkelman. He was fantastic, and I'm really excited to dig into Brett Bartholomew's new book on conscious coaching. So those are kind of the direction I'm going. I think from a strength world, I really love what Pavel's doing. From sort of a movement based world, I love Gray and what he's doing, and and all the stuff that FMS puts out. But I really am digging into like the coaching and leadership component these days. And though that's just really like a big part of what I'm doing now.
Excellent. Mike, this has been a blast. I'm so glad we finally got to sit down and do it. So just hang on the line and let me give you a proper goodbye. Bye.
Awesome.
I hope you enjoyed this brand new episode on the Leo Training Podcast. Be sure to tune in next week for another new episode and fresh content as I sit down and interview Dr. Perry Nicholson, owner of Stop Chasing Pain.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.